Hello and welcome to this special series of God Sized Stories called God Sized Hobbies. Today I have my friends Andy and Corey with us, and we're going to talk about the hobby of playing video games. As you can see, or hopefully see, if you're only listening to an audio version, I highly encourage you to switch to a video version. We're playing a game on the Xbox called Power Wash Simulator, and we need to clean this mini golf course. And while we're cleaning, we're going to go through some questions about hobbies, specifically about video games and our lives, and just get into that. So, gentlemen, let's go get cleaning. I'm going to
All
keep
right.
peeking in and see how you guys are doing, and I'm going
I'll
to start
just
asking
do
some
Cleaning time.
questions.
I'll just be tapping
Cleaning
Andy with this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're just gonna keep power washing me.
Just that's what
My
I'm
suit
doing.
is clean.
Yep.
So, obviously, the hobby we're talking about today is video games. It's not a big mystery of what they are, and they come in many different forms. But we'll start with you, Andy. What did your history with video games? How does it start?
I was thinking about that. What I'm trying to think like the earliest. Oh, actually, I totally do know the earliest memory of video games for me is so dating myself pretty quickly is I played my dad randomly brought home a computer game called King's Quest 6 or no,
Nice.
King's Quest 4, sorry. The Perils of Rosella, and it was a point and click adventure game on the computer where you had a little pixelated character walking around a fantasy world that by video game graphic standards would is appallingly simple now, but it I was in preschool and it captured my imagination so much that I think during the time I had like some sort of journaling class or
Mm.
journaling, not class, I was in preschool, journaling project in preschool, and I was supposed to fill out this book that was supposed to like talk about my life, and the whole book is just talking about King's Quest 4.
Nice.
It's just like, and then I got the golden ball under the bridge and traded it with a lizard,
Not
and
much
then I
has
gave it
changed,
to an
Andy.
ogre. Yeah, what just changed?
Not much has changed.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty formative, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, that was probably my first experience with video games that took on many different incarnations.
Nice.
Nice. What about you, Corey?
So when I was 4, we had moved to a town in Illinois called Shabana from another town. This was a suburb called Aurora, Illinois. So when we moved, we so I'd grown up with a Nintendo, like an NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the old one from the 80s. And that was what we had when we moved. And when we moved into Shabana, I had rented a game called Mega Man 3. And actually, we ended up buying it, but my dad and I played that game a ton together, and I was terrible at it. I was 4, and it's like a hard game from Japan, right? Like Japanese games are just known to be really hard. So I I was awful at the game, but it was cool to watch my dad like beat the levels and stuff. And I liked looking at the character art and all that. And I like to do art and stuff, and it definitely came through even
Mm.
now with how I design and then do my illustrations and stuff. But anyways, I have like really some of my fondest memories of being in that house when we first moved there was playing video games with my dad. We had Mega Man 3, we had this like pinball game. We had Friday the 13th, the video game, which is like
Oh, that's the worst
the
game.
hardest, like worst video game known to mankind. So if you just want to look up like a good memory of what video games were like in the 80s and 90s, look up Friday the 13th, the video game. And obviously like Mario and stuff. And I don't know. Anyway, that was just like a good memory of that. And I think my parents realized like, hey, this is something that he likes to do, and it's a good, at least it was at that time, a good use of my time. I guess you could argue that I probably got addicted to video games when I got older, but which maybe we could talk about that. But
Right.
it was a way that I could spend time with my dad and have fun with him and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's where it started.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, an important part of this series that we're going through talking about hobbies is like you kind of touched on it right there is like yes, any hobby if not monitored carefully can become an idol and can become
Hmm.
an addiction or a waste of time. But hobbies are important and God gives us them for many reasons. And throughout this series, I'm going to ask kind of a same version of three questions to everyone on that comes on the show. The first one being, how does God provide you rest through this hobby? So whoever wants to jump in on that first.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think, well, so for me, I'm married, I have two kids, and I don't play video games a lot anymore. Like I get time to do it every so often, but that's usually like late at night or if I'm home alone for some random reason, which almost never happens. So I think for me, I'm a creative person and stuff, and so being able to like do something that is like creatively stimulating, I think is helpful. It's hard because I think when I think of rest, I think of like two different ways, right? There's rest in the Lord, which is like um resting in his promises and his word and all of that, which would be very hard to do in a video game, I think, unless you're playing a game that's dedicated around the Bible, which I wouldn't feel like that'd be very restful. It probably wouldn't be very good. So, but then there's the other side of rest, I think, where we find like I don't know, like bodily rest, maybe. I don't just like
Mm-hmm.
it's I don't know, it's a way for me to like I don't want to say the word turn off my brain because that's not true.
Right.
Because that's not what's happening. I'm not like checking out, but I am like doing something that I know brings me joy and is stimulating to my like greater identity, which is like a creative thinker, creative writer, things in like, art driven person. So, I think that's
Mm-hmm.
definitely, and as it's interesting because as my kids have gotten older, I have a 3-year-old daughter and she's wanting to play because obviously she sees like we have video game consoles or whatever, or like Sarah, my wife, or I will play a game on our phone or whatever, and she'll want to play it. And so that's sort of like another, like a cyclical bonding thing that I've seen is
Mm-hmm.
that like I can show my daughter patience through showing her how to play something that's probably beyond what she can comprehend right now, but I can show her that I can be patient with her and teach her something that is fairly complicated, and then she feels accomplished when she learns it. So is that restful? I don't know, but that's sort of like a positive takeaway from it too, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
How about you, Andy?
Yeah, I think you might get similar answers from us in that Corey and I are both creative people who have both been on this podcast to talk about
Hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
same subject. So I would say that like for me personally, it's a like any medium, like so we grew up as we mentioned before in the era of like video games from the late 80s into the early 90s and into the 2000s. And for a long time video games kind of had a stigma of being some sort of damaging thing, like something that
Mm-hmm.
was um at 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 best useless or a waste of time and at worst something like dangerous.
Well, rot your
And I
brain,
don't
man.
really feel like it. What's that?
So video games will rot your brain.
Exactly. And I don't think that very many people argue that point anymore, especially now how much technology is used in a broader function for our lives. I think it's sort of funny how much I once was gonna have to learn how to type, and played a video game called Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing,
Oh yeah.
and I didn't really need that game because I was gonna learn how to type anyway in the digital age, just because it was just gonna be a thing that was part of growing up as a 13-year-old in 2003. But yeah, for me, I think video games offer rest in that I think, like Corey said, there's different types of rest, and I think rest
Mm-hmm.
is affects different people differently. And so rest doesn't necessarily mean for me turning my brain off and not having to think about anything. I think rest for me comes in the form of being given inspiration in ways that I wouldn't have seen it before. Maybe you could say kind of seeing God's creativity expressed through other people's ideas. And
Hmm.
just like reading a good book, a video game is just a form of media that like can express lots of ideas that other forms of media can't express because it's dynamic, it's not static, it's not just looking at a picture, it's interacting in a way that other forms of media you don't interact with the same way. You can interact with a book as in you can touch a book and read a book,
Hmm.
but the book's not really going to give you feedback. The book's not really going to give you information in that kind of way that it's interacting back with you. And so I really like getting to play games and experience new ideas and get inspiration from other people and be thankful that there are other people in the world who have interesting ideas that can help inspire me to make art or to think of new ideas myself. And those things are usually what get me the most interested in playing a game.
Nice. I'll move on to our next question here that like I guess you were referencing this one a little bit right there, Andy, and some
Hmm.
hobbies I feel like might lend themselves more to this next question, but I want to ask it just in case is how does this hobby potentially help you grow either in your faith or challenge you in different ways, see the world in a certain perspective? What does playing games do for you?
I think being an introverted person,
Hmm.
right?
Oh
I
no.
am somebody who needs to like disconnect from like social things, right? And just to regain like re-energize myself, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I'm an antisocial person, but just because like it legitimately makes me tired being in social like long term, long form sort of social gathering things or whatever. And so I think just from like a mental stability and it just makes me a better person when I can do something that is both stimulating yet like solitude, you know? I feel the same way about like my art, right? Like I can sit down and just like draw for a night. Like I feel so much better the next day, right?
Hmm.
I think, but then the other thing is I have found that video games have inspired like it sounds so cheesy. It sounds like a commercial, but like video games have helped me find like who I actually am is
Hmm.
one part of it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
because I think there's if you look at gaming, not just like in the terms of the media, but like the larger world of video games, like there are people that play them that are not Christians, right? I would say the majority of them that play people that play video games are Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And I have interacted with those people, whether that's through in-person things at like conventions or online or whatever, and our testimony has to live true regardless of what we're doing, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like I think it has inspired me to be a better person and live out who I am as a creative person and things like that just by having to communicate about what I like, share what I do and what I enjoy and things like that in this space, you know? Like whether that's the social things or like whether that's like even talking to family members or like what'd you do last night? Well, I played a video game. You're like, but why? And then you just talk about that and like it just helps you explore yourself more and learn more about yourself. And I think it helps you find more about who you are and things. Does that make sense? And I don't know if I'm like
Mm-hmm.
rambling, but like, and maybe not that's probably not the case for everybody, but like, if you're a creative person or you're an introverted person, like there's a strong chance that you might find good either inspiration or just like disconnected stimulation through doing this or like oh there's some other like puzzles people find a lot of joy in those too, right? They probably find similar mindsets out of those of being like, well, this is who I am. I'm an analytical person, therefore I enjoy
Mm.
Sudoku puzzles, right? Even though like I would do a Sudoku puzzle and I wouldn't be like, this is analytics. Somebody who thinks that way would, right? But I think it just helps you discover more about who you are as a person.
Yeah. How about you, Andy? What do you got for the idea of like how have you grown or what has God shown you through the hobby?
Yeah, I think some of what Corey said I would probably overlap with, but yeah, just kind of like thinking about it and listening to what Corey said, I would say, yeah, I'm someone who really appreciates a good story. Like I like
Mm.
I like a good like this kind of game was I would say it's more just kind of like an objective based game where we're
Mm-hmm.
doing a pretty simple task that anyone could probably comprehend pretty quickly. But I really like experiencing stories, especially ones that maybe I wouldn't have come up with myself, because I could kind of dig deeper into trying to understand why someone would tell a story that maybe I wouldn't tell. And that helps me, I would say, in some ways, even maybe learn how to interpret the Bible better. Because even if a game isn't made with the express intention of being Christian, I mean, God still gave even a non-Christian person the creativity to come up with what they came up with. And I think that there's something really interesting and deep about there's some actual really good artists in this using video games as a medium to tell like stories that they want to tell. And I feel like those stories, whether they intended it or not, can inform interpretations of and help like remind you about things you maybe read in the Bible or think like principles of Christianity. I think I've definitely felt that way playing playing games as like with, titles like Dark Souls or something like that. But this sounds like a bad game, right? Sounds like it's just trying to be edgy or something like that. But it's really trying to, I think there's a lot of takeaway in video games. It's a very broad medium that
Mm-hmm.
allows for a lot of interpretation. And I suppose someone else could interpret the same game in a negative way, or they could use it in a way that's not good. But I don't necessarily think, kind of like art, it's you can use something that a tool that's nothing more than a tool that you could use it in a great way to create things, or you can use it to destroy something.
Hmm.
And I guess I choose to look at things to find value in them, find meaning. And I guess as a Christian, if I'm trying to find value in something, then I'm trying to get to know or understand God or Jesus better through it,
Hmm.
Yeah.
even if it comes from an unorthodox location. I think that's probably generally what I would say as
Okay.
far as like growing with God. It's probably, yeah, maybe one of many components that all add up together, but I know I've definitely been able to spend a lot of time. Video games offer you a lot of time to think, kind of like what we're doing right now.
Yes.
You can definitely be doing this and be thinking. You get used to the motor skill it requires to do this, and then you can be kind of just like processing things. And I think, and maybe it's hard to believe, but like God can meet you in time when you're playing a game.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to just be reading a book or sitting at a desk quietly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll also. Oh, sorry, you Craig.
no, go for it, Corey.
I was also just gonna piggyback off what Andy was saying about like sort of the negative side of things too. I think it's like, we're playing a fairly inoffensive game right now, but there are
Yes.
definitely like dark things about game, like just like any other art medium, like it could be
Yes.
like their games are well known to be over sexualized, things like that. And I think so it's all about like what you put in it too. Like obviously I've played games that have like very sinful things happening in them, right? But like at the end of the day, like I'm playing them for a completely different purpose. I'm not playing them to glorify, similar to like I don't know, you watch like a Marvel superhero movie, right? Like no one's like people typically aren't watching that to glorify like murderer, but that's definitely happening in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's easy to scrutinize things just like any other piece of art and say like, oh, this is the surface level thing that's happening, therefore that is the main point of it. And that's definitely not the case with art. And I just would encourage people to like look at creative things in a way that is a creative endeavor versus a surface level statement. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Because I think that's where you get value out of things like video games. Like you can appreciate the art and the creativity, and you can also appreciate the storyline, and you can appreciate the controls, like the programming and the control scape and the interactivity of it over like the potential sinful things that are happening. And obviously, if it affects you in a negative way, don't play it, right? I choose not to
Yes.
play certain games because I'm just like, I don't really want to experience that. But there are things that happen in games that, because it's made by, generally speaking, non-Christian people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're not held to a Christian standard, but there is beauty in them, just like any other piece of
Mm-hmm.
art. Anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there. I
Yeah.
think that's been something that's really helpful, and even just communicating again who I am and who other artists are, and sort of like vouching for the creative side of the world. I think
Mm-hmm.
God loves the world, in its darkness and in its light. And I think we can find God in the things that are even dark, right? So obviously don't sin for the sake of forgiveness,
Right.
but like I think the point I'm trying to make is coming through.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, sorry, I didn't want to I didn't want to take over what you were gonna say, but
No, no,
wanted
no,
to add
that's
to
totally
that.
fine. That's that's
Yeah.
that's kind of the point of this conversation to be
Okay.
organic. I'm also going to circle back though to one of the things that Andy said too, though, about like playing a game like this. I've played a lot of this game, this Power Wash Simulator, and one of the things I've done a lot of while doing this is I'm a very distractible person. My brain wants to focus on too many things at once. So I many people in my life know that I say this statement all the time is I need to find something to distract myself from distracting myself. And like reading and scripture sometimes can be really hard for me because my brain gets distracted. So I'm always listening to like classical music or something like that when I read because it helps distract the part of my brain that's trying to distract me. And
Hmm.
in the immense amount of this game I've played, I have listened to copious amounts of scripture because it distracts that distracted part of my brain. Or there was a couple like audio Bible studies I went through on a couple apps that it was just so much easier for me to focus because that part of my brain is just being occupied right now and like the actual intellect part of my brain can focus on something else other than, "Ooh, hey, what's that? Ooh, I heard something else in the room. What is that?" And it's because I can just sit here and that's distracted because I'm like, "Oh, I gotta get this spec." Meanwhile, I'm listening to, the life of John the Baptist, and it's so much better for me, and it's been a comfort for me. And I know, like, yes, not all games are like this. Some are way more intense, and one of the reasons I chose a game like this is because it's very easy to have a conversation and not be distracted because we're just getting little things on the floor, and we're not doing something like playing Halo where we're trying to survive waves of elites and grunts.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Um,
requires a little bit more concentration.
Exactly. But I'm gonna for our final question, this hobby definitely will lean heavy on this question. This was why I wanted to talk about this hobby with you guys, and that's like how has God provided opportunities for fellowship or outreach through playing games? And I think it's just obvious partially by what we're doing now, but Corey, if you want to go into some like especially if you have a specific story about a time that you've had those opportunities.
Yeah, so it was a lot. I mean, this for sure. I mean, just keeping this friendship with you guys over
Mm-hmm.
like a digital space like this has been helpful. I mean, like internally within my own family, like I just mentioned, like I've been able to experience like to show my daughter patience and like because like I said, she's 3 and these are very complicated things to learn how to do,
Yes.
and she just doesn't have the motor skills to do it yet, but she can see that like her dad is interested in helping her and like something that she wants to do. I'm like trying to help her accomplish it, and it's like we're accomplishing it together, right? And like I think, I've also been to as like a illustrator, and like I've illustrated some comics and written them and stuff, and so I've been to conventions, like comic conventions and stuff, and I've met a lot of people that are into video games, right? And I've had conversations. Those have been really great conversation starters. Like we're into the same things,
Mm.
and it's been a great way to sort of bridge a gap, especially as an introverted person. Like it's an immediate icebreaker, right? Even people like at my church, there are some people that are like, I just played the new Spider-Man game. What'd you think? And like, okay, now we have an immediate common ground, right? And
Mm-hmm.
whether or not like I care that much about the game, like I know I've at least played it or experienced it 'cause I'm following things in this space and stuff like that. So I think those have been some prime examples, but there are undoubtedly more. I mean, even when I was in college and I was helping lead a student group at Northern Illinois called, actually, you and Andy were a part of it, called Emmaus Center.
Mm-hmm.
And before you guys joined, I was with a different group that was running it, and we had open gaming night where we had a couple Xbox 360s, and we would play video games and order pizzas and stuff, and like we had a good turnout for it like every single time, and it was a good way to for people to just be like at the end of the day, you're like, what are video games? I don't know, it's the thing that like Mario does, right? Well, I like Mario, and it's or like I like Dance Dance Revolution or Guitar Hero. So I'll come
Mm-hmm.
in and at least check this out, right? And it was a good way to bring people in the door to what was at the time a pretty helpful campus ministry. So
Mm-hmm. But you, Andy?
That's still so funny that we all went to Emmaus, but Corey went like in an era
I know.
before we even
yep.
met him. The
Hmm.
amount of times that like we almost met you, but
I
then
know.
didn't until we were all done with college is really funny to me. Yeah, I would say kind of like what Corey was saying. Like, I think you can kind of liken video games to, or like anything, like, you could find common ground with it. It's kind of like its own like language that you can speak, and it helps, especially a lot of people our age. Like, we had stories about Corey and I had stories about playing some games that by now standards would be considered, quite old, and but we started with that language, and so we grew up with that language as we
Mm-hmm.
grew up, video games grew up. And so a lot of people our age also, are part of this community and this hobby. And in my case, I would say I have a group of friends that are primarily non-Christian that I really connected with through a job that I had originally. Um, and became friends because we liked similar video games, and that was our common ground. And even though our overall like lives are pretty different. Whoa, I just saw the dragon. I'm sorry. I've been up top this whole time. But I've stayed, friends with that friend group that expanded, and especially during the pandemic, video games became an almost crucial bridging point for everybody to still be able to talk to each other, whether it was you
Mm-hmm.
guys or that group or even, other groups. It became really helpful and important in order to stay involved in each other's lives, as you guys know. And in those moments, in those quiet moments where you're power washing a dragon for a little while, people they open up. They wanna talk about things, and this is a pretty safe place to open up and talk about things, I think. And I've definitely had probably some of the deepest apologist conversations I've had in the last 3 or 4 years have been on a headset playing video games with people who just, one minute you're like, well, I really want to get that cool helmet and I'd like that space hammer for my character. And then the next thing you know, you're talking about like the reason why Paul launched his ministry and why it's important. And you're like, wait,
Yep.
why? I didn't even know that was gonna happen tonight, but here we are, and that's happened multiple times. So I think in a weird way, it's opened up, maybe not a weird way, but in a God sort of way, it opened up doors that I didn't even know were there or that I didn't even necessarily intend to open, but I've gotten used to them being there, and I've been really thankful for some pretty meaningful conversations that I hope gave perspective to some people who maybe even never had the opportunity to look at that viewpoint, or maybe if they maybe saw that viewpoint in the wild, so to speak, in real life, they may have intentionally avoided it. But this space, this kind of fictitious space, is a good place to open up conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think like a big takeaway from this, I think, is like people can look at any hobby like this, but I think primarily video games can be looked at as like fairly harmful, especially like, you're like, well, my kid plays Fortnite and he's addicted to it and I can't make him stop. And you're like, okay, yeah, that's probably true, but then there's the other side of it that's like, well, gaming is a mentally and emotionally stimulating thing that often provides a space for people to communicate in a way that they normally wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Like I like Andy said, like people have shared many different things just from sitting down, spacing out, playing a game together. And it's like, 10 minutes later, you're like, okay, now we're talking about like past trauma, and does that work
Mhm.
for everybody? No, right? But like, I think it works for a specific set of people, and those are the people that tend to be drawn to this stuff. And so I think there's like an intrinsic value of like video games are fun to play, but then there's like a cultural value and like a societal value. Repetitive cognitive input based gaming can be really helpful for, you know, spiritual or like emotional therapy.
Mhm.
So yeah, not to like overblow what seems like a kid's toy, but like
Right.
it's definitely a lot more deeper. It's a lot deeper than just, I don't know, spraying a dragon right now. Like that's definitely not like that's very surface level of like what's actually happening in my
Yes,
mind, you know?
Mhm.
absolutely.
So
Yeah, I
My
know. I know. I've been extremely blessed in just even the idea of fellowship and like for me, I moved to where I live now years ago. And when I moved here, I didn't really have friends because it was a place I didn't know anybody, and I was still blessed though to be able to virtually have friends and play games online with like you guys. Like, yeah, we're hours away, but we are literally seconds away in a game, and like compared to then before, like there was a time in my life actually Andy and I lived together and we played maybe at a time season too much. Like there was many a late night Minecraft time, but our friendship grew so much during that time, and we got to know each other so well to the point where like we built this trust and care for each other during those times that it's like I think back fondly of, the first time we played Minecraft and then it turned into us playing it a lot. And I still think of the first beetle, the beetle house he was building, and I dug through a mountain, and it's just this joyous thing that's just a part of our friendship. Or times going over to your place, Corey, and like like recently when we were struggling trying to get something to work, and even through the struggle, we were laughing, and it was totally worth every
mhm,
moment of it.
yeah.
When it's like, yeah, we could have been just sitting talking, which is good too, but this is something that bonds us together.
Hmm.
Yeah, my cousin's a psychologist specifically for kids, and I went to like a park with him one day, and he was like, "Well, so this is where I do a lot of my therapy." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Yeah, because kids won't talk to you, but if I bring them here and we throw rocks in this pond, they'll just start talking to me about deeper things." And it's just that some people need something, they need, like you said, Craig, maybe it's a distraction or maybe it's just like a means to open people up to gain trust. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like doing something together collaboratively is a really good way to get people to understand each other better.
Absolutely. Well, I don't have any other questions, but if there's anything else you guys would like to add, now would be a wonderful time to have final thoughts on this wonderful hobby.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I think if you know people that are like, I am into video games, and maybe just like try to explore it with them sometime and see if you can, that might be a good way for you to just have a conversation, even if you're like not good at video games or you don't like them. Like it could be a good way for you to have like a breakthrough conversation. You just never know. I think people are into games because of a specific reason, and it's never just by like accident. There's something that
Mm-hmm.
keeps them into it, and it's because it's an emotionally stimulating thing for them. So it's a good way to have a conversation with somebody that you might either struggle to talk to or struggle to understand.
Yeah, I'm gonna challenge I don't know what like the overall demographic for your your podcast is, Craig, but
It's it's
um,
it's it's an interesting
it's pretty
mix when
broad.
I get
Yeah.
demographics. Yeah, it is.
I want to like kids growing up being always challenged to be like, you should try and read a book. I want to challenge older people to. I challenge you to find a video game. They're pretty easy to find now. You could get one on your phone.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
don't mean like words with friends. I mean like try find something with a little bit more meat on the bones and just give it a try for like 15 20 minutes and see if it maybe like illuminates some thoughts you would never have had if you hadn't tried it. Because I think the stigma of video games being bad is over. I think it's time that we just look at them as another form of media. It doesn't have to be one that you love, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't give it a try maybe once. Just see what happens.
There you go. Just see what happens. Just as Andy said, you might find your new favorite hobby.
Or you might solidify the fact that you're like, yeah, these are really dumb and they were not your brain.
I hate this.
You never know.
Yeah, not every hobby is for everyone. Like for
Yeah.
me, there's some things I'll just, well, actually, I guess I don't know. I was gonna say like crocheting, but I've never tried it, so maybe I would love it. I guess I should go try crocheting next.
I mean, that's fair. I guess I'm gonna have to go try crocheting now.
I can
Yeah.
speak. I've never
Put
tried
the
it, but I can tell you I don't like it. So I can positive that's not something I would like to do.
That's
Well,
fair.
I'll close this episode out as I would always typically do by thanking the audience. This one is a little bit longer and it is obviously a lot different than the typical episodes are because this is video and video in a very different format as I am now spraying the dragon. Obviously, as always, audience, I couldn't do this without you. And I don't know about these other two, but we're at like 75% almost here, and I'm determined to get to 100%. And if they are as well, maybe there'll be a mini bonus episode with us just finishing the last 25% and just talking about our lives and in general. But maybe not. We'll see.
I do have
But
questions.
well, there you go. So maybe you'll get some bonus questions in there too. But audience, as always, thank you so much for listening. I couldn't do this without you. Goodbye.